The champagne flute felt heavier than it should have in my hand as I watched Elena work the room like the predator she'd always been. Her laugh, that crystalline sound that used to make my chest tight with affection, now cut through the air like breaking glass. She'd positioned herself perfectly under the chandelier in our dining room, the light catching the diamond earrings I'd bought her for our 5th anniversary, back when I still believed in us. Everyone! Elena's voice rose above the chatter of Ashwood's finest social climbers. The marketing executives, the country club crowd, the perfectly coiffed wives who measured their worth in square footage and designer handbags. I want to thank you all for celebrating my promotion with me tonight. Applause rippled through the room. I took a sip of champagne and waited. I knew Elena well enough to recognize the setup in her posture, the way she tilted her head just so when she was about to deliver what she thought was an ending blow. And of course, she continued, her smile sharp as a blade, I have to introduce you to my husband, Lucas. Her eyes found mine across the room, and I saw the calculation there. This is my ex-husband, well, soon-to-be ex. No degree, no real future, just freeloads off my money. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse. It was pitying. These people looked at me like I was a stray dog Elena had been too kind to put down. I recognized the expressions. There goes poor Elena, stuck with dead weight, Lucas who builds kitchen cabinets while she conquers the corporate world. I raised my glass higher and the room quieted. Cheers, I said, my voice carrying that deadpan delivery that had gotten me through 12 years of marriage to a woman who collected people like trophies. This is the last time any of you will see me. The silence stretched just long enough to get uncomfortable before I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, nervous laughter bubbled up, and I heard Elena's voice, bright and brittle. Don't mind him, he's always been dramatic. I paused at the coat closet, not to grab my jacket, but because Monica, Elena's best friend and the HR chief at Whitmore & Associates, had sidled up to Elena with that conspiratorial lean that meant fresh gossip. He'll be out of your hair soon, Monica whispered, but her voice carried in the sudden lull of conversation. Miles is ready to make it official. Miles, Elena's boss. The CEO with the silver temples and the kind of confidence that came from never having to check his bank balance. I'd suspected for months, but hearing it confirmed felt like swallowing broken glass. I stepped outside into the October air, my breath visible in small puffs. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elena thought she was discarding me like an old piece of furniture. But furniture could be repurposed, refinished, made into something entirely new, something dangerous. 3 days later, I was in my workshop in the basement, running my fingers along the grain of a piece of cherry wood, when I found Elena's burner phone. It wasn't an accident. I'd been watching, learning, cataloging the small changes in her routine, the way she'd started taking her purse to the bathroom, the mysterious calls she'd take in the garden, the second phone charger that appeared in her car. Elena had always been sloppy when she thought she was being clever. The phone was tucked inside an old toolbox she'd assumed I never opened, the one that held her grandmother's jewelry, the pieces she'd inherited but never wore because they weren't expensive enough for her new crowd. The messages painted a picture uglier than I'd imagined. Miles. Can't wait to have you all to myself. The penthouse feels empty without you. Elena. Soon. Lucas is too stupid to fight the divorce. We can start trying for a baby as soon as the papers are signed. Miles. Good. I want to erase every trace of him from your life. I scrolled back further, my jaw tightening with each exchange. They'd been planning this for 8 months. 8 months of Elena coming home to me, kissing my cheek, asking about my day, all while orchestrating my complete humiliation. But it was the final thread of messages that made my hands shake. Elena. Lost the baby. Doctor says it was just one of those things. Miles. Probably for the best. We can try again when you're not stressed about the divorce. Get over it and focus on what matters. Elena. You're right. Lucas would have been a terrible father anyway. I'd held Elena while she cried about that miscarriage. I'd taken 2 weeks off work to take care of her, brought her soup, rubbed her back when the grief hit her in waves. And all the while, she'd been mourning another man's child while letting me comfort her. The phone slipped from my hands and clattered onto the workbench. I stared at it for a long moment, then picked up a hammer and brought it down hard. The screen splintered, plastic fragments scattering across the scarred wood surface. But destroying the phone wouldn't erase what I'd learned. Elena wanted to discard me? Fine, but she'd forgotten something crucial about renovation work. Sometimes you had to tear everything down to the studs before you could build something new. Elena came home that evening with Thai takeout and a smile that looked practiced in the mirror. "I thought we could talk," she said, setting the bags on the kitchen island I'd built with my own hands. "About us, about making this work." I looked at her, really looked, and tried to find some trace of the woman I'd married. She was beautiful, I'd give her that. Glossy black hair, sharp cheekbones, the kind of figure that turned heads at the country club. But there was something hollow behind her eyes now, like looking into the windows of an abandoned house. "Talk about what exactly?" I asked, opening a beer. "About how you've been being with your boss for 8 months, about how you lost his baby and let me comfort you? Or should we discuss the part where you called me a freeloader in front of half the town?" Her face went white, then flushed red. "How did you—" "Does it matter?" I took a long pull of beer. "The question is, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish here? You want me to beg? Fight for you? Make this messier than it has to be?" Elena's composure cracked, and for a moment I saw something real underneath. Panic. "Lucas, please, I made a mistake. Miles doesn't mean anything. It was just stress and the promotion and—" "Stop." I set the beer down harder than necessary. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to humiliate me in public, plan my replacement, and then crawl back when it's convenient. But we could, not even if you were the last woman in Ashwood." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then the tears came, big, dramatic sobs that might have moved me a year ago. Now they just seemed like another performance. "You'll regret this," she said when the crying didn't work. "You'll never find anyone else. You'll be alone forever, and you'll remember this moment when you realize what you threw away." I smiled, and something in my expression made her take a step backward. "You know what, Elena? You're probably right, but here's the thing about being alone. It's better than being with someone who sees you as disposable." She left the Thai food on the counter and stormed upstairs. An hour later, I heard her car pull out of the driveway. Off to Miles' penthouse, no doubt, to cry on his shoulder about her unreasonable husband. I waited until midnight, then went upstairs to Elena's home office. She'd spent 3 years and $15,000 turning the spare bedroom into her personal shrine to success. Awards lined the walls. Her MBA diploma hung in a custom frame. Photo after photo showed Elena shaking hands with clients, cutting ribbons, accepting accolades. It was her favorite room in the house, the place she went to remind herself how important she was. I pulled a book of matches from my pocket and struck one, watching the flame dance in the darkness. "Time to clean house," I murmured. The fire started small, just Elena's diploma curling at the edges, the expensive frame warping in the heat. But it spread quickly, hungrily devouring years of carefully curated success. The awards melted. The photographs blackened and twisted. The custom desk I'd built for our second anniversary, back when I still believed I was building something permanent, crackled and split as the flames consumed it. I stood in the doorway and watched it burn, thinking about renovation. Sometimes you had to destroy something completely before you could create something better in its place. The smoke alarm shrieked, but I'd already disabled the one in the hallway. By the time the fire department arrived, Elena's shrine would be nothing but ash and memory, just like our marriage. The rusty buckle sat on the outskirts of Ashwood like a scab on otherwise pristine skin. It was the kind of place the country club crowd pretended didn't exist. A roadside bar with sticky floors, neon beer signs, and the sort of clientele that knew how to mind their own business. Grace Kellerman had been tending bar there for 15 years, and in that time, she'd accumulated enough secrets to topple half the town's power structure. She was sharp-tongued, silver-haired, and had the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "Well, well," she said as I slid onto a bar stool, "if it isn't Lucas Moreau, heard you had some excitement at your place last night." Word traveled fast in a town like Ashwood. I ordered a whiskey and waited for Grace to pour before answering. "Electrical fire. These old houses, you know how it is." "Uh-huh." Grace's smile was knowing. Shame it was Elena's office that got hit. All those awards gone up in smoke. Tragic, I agreed. Of course, Elena's been spending a lot of time away from home lately. Might not even notice what she's lost. I met Grace's eyes in the mirror behind the bar. "Is that so?" "Oh, honey, everyone knows about her and Miles Remington. Been carrying on like teenagers for months. She brings him to that fancy restaurant over in Millbrook, thinking nobody from Ashwood will see them. Grace leaned closer. But my cousin Diane works there. Says they can barely keep their hands off each other. Interesting. What's really interesting, Grace continued, polishing a glass with more attention than it needed, is that Miles is throwing a little party tomorrow night. Private affair at the country club. Celebrating Elena's promotion, if you catch my meaning. I did catch her meaning. Miles was making Elena's new status, both professional and personal, official to their circle, letting everyone know she was his now, that Lucas Moreau was ancient history. You know, I said, finishing my whiskey, I think I might crash that party. Grace's grin was sharp as a knife. Now that sounds like entertainment. The Ashwood Country Club dripped old money and older secrets. I'd been there exactly once before, as Elena's guest at a charity function where I'd spent the evening watching rich people bid ridiculous amounts on things they didn't need while feeling superior about their generosity. Tonight, I walked through the front door like I belonged there. The party was in the oak-paneled library, intimate and exclusive. Maybe 20 people, all of them from Elena and Miles's professional circle. Elena wore a red dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, and she had her arm linked through Miles's like she was afraid he might escape. Miles himself was everything Central Casting would order for successful CEO, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from weekend sailing trips. He had his hand on the small of Elena's back in a gesture that screamed ownership. I helped myself to a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and made my way over to Monica, who was holding the quart near the fireplace. "Lucas," she said, her voice pitched just a little too high. "What a surprise." "Hello, Monica. Lovely party. Very intimate." Her eyes darted toward Elena and Miles, who hadn't noticed me yet. "I didn't realize you were invited." "Oh, I wasn't. But you know how it is. When your wife gets promoted, you want to celebrate." I took a sip of champagne and smiled, even if she's celebrating with her boss, especially then. Monica's face went pale. Around us, conversation began to slow as people picked up on the tension. "Lucas," she said carefully, "maybe this isn't the best place." "For what? To congratulate my wife on her success?" I raised my voice just enough to carry. "Elena's worked so hard for this promotion. Really put in the extra hours. Nights, weekends, even some very early mornings." Now I had the room's attention. Elena had finally spotted me, and her face was a mask of barely controlled panic. Miles looked like he was deciding whether to have me thrown out or try to brazen it out. I decided to help him make the choice. "Miles," I called out, raising my glass in his direction, "congratulations on your new acquisition. I'm sure you'll take very good care of her." The silence in the room was deafening. Elena's face had gone from pale to crimson, and Miles looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. "I think," Miles said, his voice tight with control, "there's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" I wandered closer, noting how Elena seemed to shrink into herself. "I don't think so. I think everyone here knows exactly what's going on. The question is whether they're going to pretend otherwise." Margaret Whitmore, the company founder's widow and the closest thing Ashwood had to royalty, stepped forward. She was 85, sharp as a tack, and had never liked Elena. "Young man," she said, her voice carrying the authority of old money and older power. "Perhaps you'd care to elaborate?" Elena made a small, desperate sound, but I was already committed to the path I'd chosen. "Well, Mrs. Whitmore, it seems my wife has been conducting some very thorough performance reviews with her supervisor. The kind that require privacy, discretion, and apparently a burner phone." The room erupted in whispers. Elena looked like she wanted to disappear into the Persian rug, and Miles' face had gone an interesting shade of purple. "You bastard!" Elena hissed, finally finding her voice. Now, I said, my tone conversational. "Let's keep this civil. After all, we're all friends here." But we weren't friends. We weren't even enemies, really. We were just people who'd been pretending to be something we weren't, and now the masks were coming off. I finished my champagne, set the glass on the mantelpiece, and headed for the door. Behind me, the whispers were already turning into full conversations, and I knew that by morning, everyone in Ashwood would know that Elena Moreau and Miles Remington had been exposed in the most public way possible. As I reached the door, I turned back for one last look. Elena was crying, but they weren't the pretty tears she'd used on me. These were ugly, desperate sobs of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse. Miles had his arm around her, but his eyes were already calculating damage control. He was a businessman first, and I'd just made Elena a liability. "Good night, everyone," I called out cheerfully. "Thanks for a lovely evening." The October air felt crisp and clean after the stifling atmosphere of the club. I walked to my truck, whistling softly under my breath. Phase 1 was complete. Elena's reputation in Ashwood's social circles was in ruins, and her relationship with Miles was now public knowledge. But I was just getting started. After all, a good renovation took time, patience, and attention to detail. And I'd always been very good at my work. Owen McCarthy had been my best friend since high school, back when we were both too young to understand that the world was designed to grind up people like us. He'd tried to beat the system by becoming a cop, spent 15 years watching the law protect the wrong people, then quit to become a private investigator. Now he specialized in what he called gray area work, the kind of investigations that lived in the spaces between legal and illegal, ethical and necessary. "You've got balls, I'll give you that," he said, sliding into the booth across from me at the Rusty Buckle. "The whole town's talking about last night?" "Good," I said. "Let them talk." Owen signaled Grace for a beer, then leaned back and studied me with cop eyes. "This isn't like you, Lucas. You've always been the guy who takes the high road even when it screws you over. Maybe I got tired of being screwed over. Or maybe you're about to do something stupid that'll land you in jail." Owen's beer arrived, and he took a long pull. "Talk to me. What's the end game here?" I'd been asking myself the same question. What did I want? Elena gone? Miles destroyed? The whole corrupt system that had made them possible burned to the ground? "I want them to understand what it feels like," I said finally, "to be discarded, humiliated, to watch everything they've built turn to ash. And then what? Then I disappear. Start over somewhere else, maybe Montana. Build houses for people who pay their bills and don't think they're better than everyone else." Owen nodded slowly. "Okay, but if you're going to do this, do it right. Don't leave fingerprints, don't give them ammunition to use against you, and for God's sake, don't do anything that'll get you arrested." "I'm not planning to end anyone, Owen. I know. But there are other ways to destroy yourself going after revenge. Trust me, I've seen it happen." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "That said, I might have something that'll interest you." Did a little digging into Miles Remington's finances. I opened the envelope and found bank statements, credit reports, and what looked like corporate documents. "How did you—" "Don't ask. But take a look at page 3. Page 3 showed a series of transfers from Whitmore and Associates accounts to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were substantial, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. Miles has been skimming," Owen explained. "Not enough to trigger an audit, but enough to fund a very comfortable lifestyle. The penthouse, the car, the expensive dinners with your wife, it's all bought with company money. This is enough to destroy him. If it gets to the right people, yeah, but it has to be handled carefully. Anonymous tip to the board of directors, maybe a leak to the financial press. Make it look like someone inside the company got suspicious." I studied the documents, my mind already working through possibilities. "What about Elena? Is she involved?" "Hard to say. She might not know about the embezzlement, but she's definitely benefited from it. Those jewelry receipts, the expensive trips. Miles was buying her loyalty with stolen money." The irony was perfect. Elena had always accused me of being financially irresponsible, of not providing the lifestyle she deserved. Meanwhile, she was living off embezzled funds and didn't even know it. "There's something else," Owen said. "I've been watching Miles' penthouse. He's got security cameras, but the system is about 10 years old, easy enough to disable if someone knew what they were doing. Are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, just mentioning that if someone wanted to pay Miles a visit, it wouldn't be impossible." Grace appeared at our table with another round, her timing perfect as always. "You boys planning something interesting?" "Just catching up," I said. "Uh-huh." Grace's smile was knowing. "Well, if you need any local intelligence, you know where to find me. I hear all sorts of things in this place." After she left, Owen leaned forward. "Last chance to back out, Lucas. Once you cross certain lines, there's no going back." I thought about Elena's face at the country club, the way she'd looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. I thought about Miles's smug confidence, his assumption that money and power made him untouchable. I crossed the line the night she humiliated me in front of our guests. I said, "For everything since then has just been following through." Owen nodded and finished his beer. "Then let's make sure we do this right." Miles Remington's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of Ashwood's only luxury high-rise, a gleaming monument to his success and ego. The building had a doorman, security cameras, and the kind of residents who minded their own business as long as their property values stayed high. I spent 3 days watching, learning the rhythms of the place. The doorman took smoke breaks every hour on the hour. The security cameras had blind spots near the service entrance, and Miles kept predictable hours, leaving for work at 7:30, returning around 6, unless he was meeting Elena for one of their discreet dinners. On Thursday night, I made my move. The service entrance led to a freight elevator that opened directly into the penthouse's utility room. Owen had been right about the security system. It was sophisticated for its time, but time had passed it by. A few snipped wires, and the cameras went dark. Miles' penthouse was everything I'd expected, all glass and steel and expensive furniture that looked uncomfortable. Abstract art that probably cost more than I made in a year. A wine collection that could fund a small country. But it was the bedroom that told the real story. Elena's jewelry scattered across the nightstand, her clothes in the walk-in closet, still bearing tags from boutiques I couldn't afford to walk into. A framed photo of the two of them on what looked like a Caribbean beach, Elena's smile radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, not for evidence, Owen's financial documents would handle that, but for something more personal. I wanted Elena to know that I'd been here, in the space she'd thought was private and safe. The living room held more treasures. Miles's laptop, carelessly left open on the coffee table. I plugged in the USB drive Owen had given me, a little piece of software that would copy files and leave no trace of its presence. While the program ran, I explored the rest of the penthouse. The kitchen held expensive wine and takeout containers from the kind of restaurants that didn't list prices on their menus. The second bedroom had been converted into an office, its walls lined with awards and photographs of Miles shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. But it was the desk that made me smile. Sitting right there in the open, as if Miles had never considered that someone might come looking, was a ledger detailing his embezzlement scheme. Dates, amounts, account numbers, everything Owen had found, and more. The man's arrogance was breathtaking. He'd been stealing from his own company for years, funding his lifestyle and his seduction of my wife. And he'd kept records like he was proud of it. I photographed every page, then returned the ledger to exactly where I'd found it. Miles would never know I'd been here, but the evidence would find its way to the right people soon enough. The laptop finished copying, and I pocketed the USB drive. Time to leave my calling card. I'd brought a can of red spray paint and a bag of sawdust from my workshop. In the living room, I wrote "Home Wrecker" across the floor-to-ceiling windows in letters 3 feet tall. The sawdust went into the wine collection, every bottle opened, every vintage ruined. But the piece de resistance was the bedroom. I arranged Elena's jewelry to spell out "Hoe" across the white silk comforter, then left a note on Miles's pillow. "Looks like your ride's as reliable as your morals. L." By the time I made it back to the service elevator, I was grinning like a teenager who'd just pulled the perfect prank. Miles would come home to find his sanctuary violated, his secrets exposed, and his girlfriend's reputation literally spelled out in diamonds and pearls. The doorman was still on his smoke break when I slipped out through the service entrance. I drove home through Ashwood's quiet streets, already imagining the look on Miles's face when he discovered what I'd left for him. Phase 2 was complete. Now things would start getting interesting. The call came at 2 in the morning, Miles's voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You son of a witch," he said without preamble. "You think you're clever?" I'd been expecting this. "Miles, working late again? You broke into my home. You destroyed my property. That's felony breaking and entering, criminal mischief." "Did I?" I interrupted. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you have proof." The silence stretched long enough that I could almost hear him thinking. Of course he had no proof. The security cameras had been disabled, and I'd been careful not to leave fingerprints. More importantly, Calling the police would mean explaining why someone had targeted him specifically, which would lead to uncomfortable questions about his relationship with Elena. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Want? I don't want anything from you, Miles. You've already given me everything I need. If this is about Elena, this isn't about Elena. This is about you thinking you can take whatever you want without consequences." "You're making a mistake," Miles said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a threatening tone. "I have resources, connections. I can make your life very difficult." I laughed, and the sound seemed to catch him off guard. "Miles, my life is already difficult. My wife is being with her boss, my marriage is over, and half the town thinks I'm a loser. What exactly are you going to do to me that hasn't already been done?" You can what? Fire me? I'm self-employed, ruin my reputation? Elena already handled that. Take away my money? I don't have any." The silence was longer this time. "Here's the thing about having nothing left to lose," I continued. "It's incredibly liberating. You should try it sometime." "This isn't over," Miles said. "No," I agreed, "it's not." He hung up and I lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Owen would make an anonymous call to the Whitmore and Associates Board of Directors. The financial documents would find their way to the right people, and Miles Remington would discover that stealing from your own company was a lot harder to explain than a messy divorce. But first, he'd probably try to intimidate me. Men like Miles always believed that problems could be solved with money or muscle, and since money wouldn't work on someone who had nothing, that left muscle. I was actually looking forward to it. Jordan Voss was the kind of man who solved problems with his fists and asked questions later. He worked for Miles in some vague capacity. Security consultant, the business card said. But everyone knew what that really meant. He was muscle, pure and simple. The sort of guy who made uncomfortable conversations go away. He showed up at my house on Friday night, just after 11. I was in the workshop, putting the finishing touches on a cabinet that would probably never be delivered, when I heard the back door creak open. Most people would have panicked, called the police, grabbed a tool, barricaded themselves in a room. But I'd been expecting this visit, and I'd prepared accordingly. The workshop had always been my sanctuary, the place where I could create something beautiful from raw materials. But it was also full of tools that could double as tools, and I knew every inch of the space in the dark. Jordan made it halfway down the basement stairs before he triggered the first trap. The tripwire was nearly invisible, stretched across the 7th step and connected to a bucket of wood stain balanced on a shelf. When Jordan's foot caught it, 20 pounds of dark liquid came crashing down, soaking him from head to toe. "What the?" He never finished the sentence. The second trap was a modified nail tool, rigged to fire when someone stepped on a pressure plate at the bottom of the stairs. The nail caught Jordan in the thigh, not deep enough to cause permanent damage, but painful enough to drop him to one knee. I stepped out of the shadows, a cordless drill in one hand and a crowbar in the other. "Evening, Jordan. Miles send you?" Jordan was a big man, probably 6'4", and built like a linebacker, but the nail in his leg had taken some of the fight out of him. He looked up at me with a mixture of pain and confusion. "You're absolutely crazy," he said. "Maybe. But I'm crazy with a workshop full of power tools, and you're hurt on my floor." I hefted the drill, its motor whining as I pulled the trigger. "Want to tell me why you're here? Miles wants you to back off. Stop harassing him. Stop bothering Elena. Walk away, and nobody gets hurt." "Interesting definition of nobody gets hurt," I said, nodding toward his wounded leg. "But I appreciate the message. Here's mine for Miles. Next time, send someone who can spell intimidation." Jordan tried to stand, winced, and sat back down. "You can't keep this up. Miles has resources." "Miles has problems," I interrupted. "Big ones. The kind that make vindictive ex-husbands seem pretty minor by comparison." I could see the confusion in Jordan's eyes. He was muscle, not brains, and he had no idea what I was talking about, which meant Miles hadn't told him about the embezzlement, the financial records, or the anonymous tip that was probably being reviewed by the board of directors at that very moment. "Get out of my house," I said, "and tell Miles that if he sends anyone else, I won't be so gentle." Jordan limped up the stairs, leaving a trail of dark streaks and wood stain. I heard the back door slam, then the sound of a car engine starting. I cleaned up the mess, reset the traps, and went upstairs to pour myself a drink. Tomorrow, Miles would realize that intimidation wasn't going to work. He'd have to try something else, or risk having his carefully constructed world collapse around him. Either way, I was ready. Grace was polishing glasses when I walked into the Rusty Buckle the next evening, but her smile told me she'd been expecting me. Well, well, she said, setting down the glass. Heard you had some excitement last night. News travels fast. Jordan Voss isn't exactly subtle. Came in here around midnight, hurt and furious, demanding to know who the heck you really are. Grace's grin was sharp. I told him you were just a carpenter who didn't like uninvited guests. I ordered a whiskey and waited for the rest of the story. But here's the interesting part, Grace continued, leaning across the bar. Elena came in about an hour later, looking like she'd been crying. Ordered 3 shots of tequila and started talking about how everything was falling apart. What did she say? Oh, honey, she said a lot of things. How Miles was acting paranoid, how he'd gotten some kind of phone call that had him spooked, how she was starting to think maybe she'd made a mistake. The anonymous tip had reached its target then. Owen's contact on the board of directors had probably called an emergency meeting, and Miles was scrambling to explain why company funds had been flowing into his personal accounts. She asked about you, Grace added. Wanted to know if you'd been in here. What you were planning. I told her that wasn't my business to share. Appreciate that. Of course, I might have mentioned that you seemed different lately. More focused, like a man with a purpose. Grace poured herself a shot of whiskey and raised it in a mock toast. To purpose. We drank, and I felt the liquor burn away some of the tension I'd been carrying. Elena was starting to crack. Miles was under investigation, and Jordan's failed intimidation attempt had probably made things worse for everyone involved. There's something else, Grace said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My cousin Diane, the one who works at that fancy restaurant in Millbrook? She says Miles and Elena had dinner there last night, and it didn't go well. Define didn't go well. Shouting match in the parking lot. Elena accused Miles of dragging her down with him, said she was tired of being his dirty little secret. Miles told her she was lucky he'd given her the time of day. So the cracks were showing. Miles was under pressure from the board investigation, and Elena was realizing that her meal ticket might not be as reliable as she'd thought. They deserve each other, I said. Maybe, but deserving something and getting it are 2 different things. Grace refilled my glass without being asked. Word is Elena's been calling around, trying to find another job. Seems like Whitmore and Associates might not be the stable career move she thought it was. That was interesting. If Elena was job hunting, it meant she knew about the investigation, or at least suspected that Miles's position was in jeopardy. She was already planning her exit strategy, ready to abandon him the same way she'd abandoned me. You know what the really funny part is? Grace continued. She asked Margaret Whitmore for a reference. Can you imagine? After what happened at the country club, Elena thought the old lady would help her find another job. What did Mrs. Whitmore say? Grace's laugh was sharp as broken glass. She said Elena had shown remarkable initiative in her personal relationships, and that any employer would be lucky to have someone so dedicated. The insult was perfectly crafted, polite enough to avoid a lawsuit, but cutting enough to destroy Elena's chances at any respectable firm. Margaret Whitmore had been playing these games since before Elena was born. I finished my drink and left money on the bar. Thanks for the information, Grace. Any time, honey. This is better than cable TV. As I walked to my truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Satisfaction. Elena and Miles were turning on each other, their alliance cracking under pressure. Soon they'd be too busy saving themselves to worry about revenge against me. But I wasn't done with them yet. Not even close. The lakeside cabin had belonged to my grandfather, a place where he'd gone to fish and drink and escape the disappointments of ordinary life. I'd inherited it along with his tools and his cynical view of human nature, and over the years, it had become my retreat from Elena's social climbing and endless ambition. She'd always hated the cabin, called it a shack that smelled like fish and old wood, too rustic for her tastes, too far from the restaurants and boutiques that defined her idea of civilization, which made it the perfect place for what I had planned. I spent Saturday morning preparing the cabin, checking the generator, stocking the refrigerator, making sure everything was ready for guests. Then I sent 3 text messages from different burner phones. To Elena, we need to talk. Cabin, tonight, 8 p.m., come alone, L. To Miles. I have something that belongs to you. Cabin, tonight, 8 p.m., bring Elena, a friend, and to Monica. Elena needs your help. Emergency at the cabin. Tonight, 8 p.m. Don't call first. E. 3 different messages, 3 different tones, but all designed to accomplish the same thing. Get all the major players to the same place at the same time. No more private conversations, no more careful maneuvering. Time for everything to come out in the open. Owen arrived at 7:30 carrying a duffel bag and wearing the kind of expression that meant he thought I'd finally lost my mind. "This is insane," he said, setting the bag on the kitchen table. "You're going to get yourself ended or arrested or both. Maybe, but I'm tired of playing defense." Owen opened the bag, revealing a collection of surveillance equipment, cameras, microphones, recording devices. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Everything gets recorded, everything gets documented. When this goes sideways, I want evidence that you didn't start the violence. Assuming there is violence. Lucas, you've lured 3 people who hate you to an isolated cabin in the woods. There's going to be violence." He was probably right. Elena would be desperate, Miles would be cornered, and Monica would be looking for someone to blame for the mess her friend had created. Put them all in the same room with the man who'd orchestrated their downfall, and things would get ugly fast. But that was exactly what I wanted. No more whispered conversations, no more careful social maneuvering. Just raw, honest emotion and the consequences that came with it. Owen finished setting up the equipment and checked his watch. "They'll start arriving soon. Last chance to call this off." "Not a chance." "Then, at least tell me you have an exit strategy." I smiled and pulled back the curtain, revealing the lake beyond. A small motorboat bobbed at the dock, its engine recently serviced and ready to go. "Always have a backup plan," I said. Owen shook his head but didn't argue. He knew me well enough to recognize when my mind was made up. And despite his concerns, I could see the anticipation in his eyes. He wanted to see how this played out almost as much as I did. At 8 o'clock exactly, headlights swept across the cabin's windows. The first guests had arrived. Elena came alone, which surprised me. I'd expected her to bring backup, or at least to coordinate with Miles, but she walked up the gravel path by herself, her heels clicking against the stones, her face pale in the porch light. She was still beautiful. That hadn't changed. But there was something desperate in her posture now, a brittleness that hadn't been there during our marriage. Success had always been Elena's favorite obsession, and withdrawal was making her dangerous. "Lucas," she said when I opened the door, "we need to talk. That's why you're here." She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the cabin's rustic interior with the same distaste she'd always shown. "This place hasn't changed. Neither have you. Still judging everything by whether it meets your standards." Elena's jaw tightened. "I didn't come here to fight." "No? Then why did you come?" She moved to the window, staring out at the dark lake. "Because everything is falling apart, and I think you're the only one who can stop it." "Interesting theory. What makes you think I'd want to stop it?" "Because despite everything, you're not cruel. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But you're not the kind of man who destroys people for sport." I almost laughed. Elena still saw me as the same passive, accommodating husband she'd married. She had no idea how much I'd changed, how much her betrayal had burned away everything soft and forgiving in my nature. "You might be surprised," I said. Before Elena could respond, more headlights swept across the windows. Miles' BMW pulled up behind Elena's car, and I could see 2 figures in the front seat. "You didn't come alone," I observed. Elena's face went white. "I didn't know he was coming." "But you're not surprised. Miles has been paranoid lately. He's convinced you're trying to destroy him." "Smart man." The front door opened without a knock, and Miles walked in like he owned the place. He was followed by Monica, who looked confused and slightly annoyed. "What the heck is this?" Miles demanded, his eyes moving from Elena to me and back again. "A conversation," I said. "Long overdue." Monica stepped forward, her confusion turning to anger. "Elena, your text said there was an emergency. What's going on?" "I didn't send any text," Elena said quietly. The pieces were falling into place, and I could see understanding dawn on their faces. They'd all been played, manipulated into coming here by someone who'd studied their weaknesses and exploited them perfectly. "You," Miles said, his voice tight with rage. "You set this up. Guilty as charged." Miles took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists, but Elena grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said. That's what he wants. She was right, but not for the reason she thought. I didn't want violence. I wanted truth. And sometimes the only way to get truth was to strip away all the polite pretenses and force people to show who they really were. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the cabin's small living area. All of you, it's time we had an honest conversation. I'm not sitting anywhere, Miles said. I'm calling the police. He pulled out his phone, then stared at the screen with frustration. No signal. Cell tower's been down all week, I lied smoothly. Storm damage. But don't worry, we won't need outside help for this. Monica was looking around the cabin with growing unease. This is insane. Elena, we're leaving. No, Elena said, surprising everyone. Lucas is right. We need to talk. She moved to the couch and sat down, her posture rigid but determined. After a moment, Monica joined her, leaving Miles standing alone by the door. What do you want? Miles asked. I want you to admit what you've done, all of it. The affair, the embezzlement, the lies. I want it on record. Miles' laugh was harsh. You're delusional if you think. The board of directors received some interesting documents yesterday, I interrupted, on bank records, transfer receipts, a very detailed ledger of your creative accounting practices. They've called a special meeting for Monday morning. The color drained from Miles's face. You can't prove anything, can I? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken in his penthouse. Nice handwriting, by the way. Very thorough record-keeping for someone who claims innocence. Elena was staring at Miles with growing horror. What is he talking about? What embezzlement? Nothing, Miles said quickly. He's lying. $2.3 million over 18 months, I said, showing Elena the photos. Funneled through shell companies, used to fund a lifestyle your salary couldn't support. The penthouse, the cars, the expensive dinners, all bought with stolen money. That's not possible, Elena whispered. The jewelry he bought you? Company funds? The Caribbean vacation? Company funds. Heck, even the champagne at your promotion party was paid for with money he stole from his own employer. Elena stood up slowly, her face a mask of betrayal and rage. You used me, she said to Miles. You bought me with stolen money. Elena, let me explain. Explain what? How you turned me into an accessory to embezzlement? How you made me complicit in your crimes? You didn't know, Monica said quickly. Nobody could prove you knew. Could they prove she didn't know? I asked. When the FBI starts investigating, when they freeze all the accounts and trace every transaction, do you think they'll believe Elena had no idea where the money was coming from? The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena sank back onto the couch, her face pale with understanding. She wasn't just Miles' mistress. She was potentially his accomplice, whether she'd known it or not. You bastard, she whispered, but I wasn't sure if she was talking to Miles or me. There's more, I said, pulling out another phone. Would you like to hear the recording of you and Miles discussing how to frame me for domestic misuse? Or should we skip straight to the part where you laughed about my pathetic attempts to save our marriage? Elena's eyes widened. How did you... Bugs are surprisingly easy to plant when you know someone's routine. You and Miles aren't as careful as you think. I pressed play, and Elena's voice filled the cabin. Lucas is so stupid. He'll probably represent himself in court. We can say whatever we want, and who's going to believe him over us? Miles' response was equally highly damaging. Domestic misuse allegations will destroy his credibility. Even if the charges don't stick, the accusation will follow him forever. Elena's face crumpled as she heard her own words played back. You didn't mean to get caught, I corrected. There's a difference. Monica was staring at her friend with horror. Elena, how could you even consider... Shut up, Monica, Miles snapped. You don't understand the situation. I understand enough, Monica shot back. I understand that you've been stealing from the company I work for, and that Elena was planning to file false charges against her husband. The alliance was cracking, just as I'd hoped. Faced with evidence of their crimes, they were turning on each other, looking for someone to blame. None of this matters, Miles said, trying to regain control. You can't use illegally obtained evidence in court. Who said anything about court? I asked. I was thinking more along the lines of social media. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Amazing how fast information spreads these days. Miles went very still. You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? You've already destroyed my reputation in this town. What do I have to lose by returning the favor? The truth was, I had no intention of posting anything online, but Miles didn't know that, and the threat was enough to make him sweat. "What do you want?" he asked again, his voice strained. "I want a confession. All of it. The embezzlement, the affair, the plan to frame me. I want it recorded, signed, and witnessed. And if we refuse?" I shrugged. "Then Monica goes back to Whitmore and Associates and tells the board everything she's heard tonight. The recordings get leaked to the press, and you all get to explain your actions to a federal prosecutor." Elena was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "This is all your fault," she said to Miles. "You promised me everything would be perfect." "Nothing's perfect," Miles replied. "I did what I had to do." "You did what you wanted to do," Monica corrected. "And now we're all going to pay for it." The cabin fell silent except for Elena's crying and the sound of wind across the lake. Outside, storm clouds were gathering, and I could smell rain in the air. "I'm waiting," I said. Miles looked around the room, taking in the faces of the women he'd manipulated and the man he'd underestimated. His shoulders sagged as he realized he was out of options. "Fine," he said. "I'll give you your confession." But as he reached into his jacket, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Not a pen or a phone, but the grip of a pistol. "Miles, no!" Elena screamed. The tool came out smooth and fast, trained on my chest. Miles' face was calm now, the face of a man who'd made a decision. "You should have taken the money and walked away," he said. "But you had to be clever. Had to play games." "Put the tool down," Monica said. "This is insane." "What's insane is letting this nobody destroy everything I've built." Miles's finger tightened on the trigger. "Sorry, Elena. This wasn't how I wanted it to end." But Elena wasn't done surprising me. She launched herself at Miles, clawing at his tool hand, screaming at him to stop. The tool discharged into the ceiling, sending splinters of wood raining down. I didn't waste the opportunity. I tackled Miles around the waist, driving him backward into the wall. The tool flew from his hand, skittering across the floor toward the fireplace. Miles was bigger than me, but I was angrier. 12 years of swallowed insults, of being dismissed and underestimated, came pouring out in a flurry of punches that drove him to his knees. "Lucas, stop!" Elena grabbed my arm. "You're going to end him." I looked down at Miles, injured and dazed, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Maybe I should." "No," Elena said firmly. "That's not who you are." She was right. I wasn't a butcher, despite everything they'd done to me. But I was something else now, something harder and more dangerous than the man they'd married and manipulated. I grabbed Miles by the collar and dragged him to his feet. "You're going to write that confession," I said. "All of it. And then you're going to disappear from Ashwood and never come back." Miles nodded, dark streaks streaming from his nose. Okay, I'll do whatever you want." But as I turned to find paper and pen, I heard Elena's voice, cold and calculating. "Actually, I have a better idea." I spun around to find her holding Miles's tool, pointing it not at him but at me. "Elena," Monica breathed. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago," Elena replied. "Taking control of my own life." The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone harder and more desperate. Someone who'd realized that all her careful plans were crumbling and was ready to do whatever it took to save herself. "You think you're so clever," she said to me. "But you made one mistake. You assumed I was just Miles's victim, that I didn't know what was happening. You knew about the embezzlement?" Elena's smile was sharp as a knife. "Whose idea do you think it was?" The revelation hit like a physical blow. Elena hadn't been seduced by Miles. She'd been the architect of the whole scheme. The affair, the stolen money, the plan to frame me, all of it had been her idea. "You played us both," Miles said, understanding dawning on his battered face. "I played everyone," Elena corrected. "Lucas with his pathetic devotion, Miles with his ego and his money, even Monica with her desperate need to be needed." Monica was backing toward the door, her face pale with shock. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," Elena said. "You were too busy gossiping and feeling superior to see what was really happening." The tool never wavered from my chest. Elena's hand was steady, her voice calm. She'd found her center again, the cold calculation that had always been at her carnage. "Here's what's going to happen," she continued. "Miles is going to take the blame for everything. The embezzlement, The affair, all of it. He's going to confess to ending Lucas in a jealous rage. Then he's going to put that tool to his own head. Elena, no, Miles whispered. And I'm going to be the grieving widow who barely escaped with her life, the victim of two men who destroyed each other over their obsession with me. It was brilliant, in a sociopathic way. Elena would emerge from the wreckage as the sole survivor, the innocent woman caught between two dangerous men. She'd probably even get sympathy from the community, poor Elena, who'd tried so hard to make her marriage work. There's just one problem, I said. What's that? I smiled, and something in my expression made her take a step back. You're not the only one who's been recording tonight. Elena's eyes widened as she noticed the small cameras Owen had hidden around the cabin, the microphones that had captured every word of her confession. Smile for the audience, I said. They won't be your friends much longer. The tool trembled in Elena's hand. You're bluffing, am I? The sound of sirens in the distance answered her question. Owen had been monitoring everything from his car, and when the tool came out, he'd called for backup. Elena's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, and finally resignation. The mask she'd worn for so long finally slipped away, revealing the cold, calculating woman underneath. You always were smarter than you looked, she said. And you were always exactly as heartless as I feared. The sirens were getting closer. Elena looked at the tool in her hand, then at the faces surrounding her, badly hurt and broken. Monica, horrified and betrayed. Me, standing calm and unafraid. This isn't over, she said. Yes, I replied. It is. Elena raised the tool, but not toward me. For a moment, I thought she might actually pull the trigger on herself, take the final exit on her own terms. Instead, she threw the tool into the fireplace and sank onto the couch, her face a mask of defeat. I want a lawyer, she said. The cabin door burst open and Owen led a team of state police inside. The next few hours were a blur of statements, evidence collection, and arrests. Elena and Miles were led away in handcuffs, while Monica was questioned as a potential witness. By dawn, it was over. The woman who'd humiliated me, the man who'd stolen her away, and the system that had protected them. All of it was finally exposed to the light. I stood on the cabin's porch, watching the sun rise over the lake, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Owen joined me, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. So what now? Now I disappear, I said. New town, new name, new life. Any regrets? I thought about Elena's face when she realized her plan had failed, about Miles hurt and broken on the cabin floor, about the empire of lies they'd built together crashing down around them. Just one, I said. What's that? I smiled and raised my coffee cup in a mock toast. I should have done this sooner. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of the night. In a few hours, all of Ashwood would know the truth about Elena Moreau and Miles Remington. The gossips would have enough material to last for years. But I wouldn't be there to see it. I'd already packed my truck, already chosen my destination, Montana maybe, or Colorado. Somewhere with mountains and clean air and people who judged you by your work, not your bank account. Elena had been right about one thing. I'd never find anyone else in Ashwood. But Ashwood was a small place, and the world was full of possibilities. I finished my coffee, walked to my truck, and drove away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I could see smoke rising from the cabin's chimney, carrying the ashes of my old life up into the morning sky. The last toast in Ashwood was finally over.